And that what with the red one? Oh, there's a green button. There we go.
Green button, green light. Testing, testing.
You need to do the Raphael.
Yeah. Okay, agendas. Anyone down there?
Thank you very much.
I have one.
Take off my clanky brace.
Chair's too tall.
Does anyone need this memorandum?
I didn't make one of those.
Okay.
I have
Do we need to refer to it?
the agenda.
I only have 2 copies. Maybe you can share?
It's okay. I can print one when I go home.
Okay.
Oh, thanks.
So, we are on TV. Are you ready to?
We're ready. We've got our copies out there. Okay, for anyone who's at home missing primetime TV, you've tuned in to the Complete Street Safety Committee. And since you're probably not familiar with the members of the committee or what the committee does, I think it's worthwhile just take a moment for each member to be introduced for anyone at home. So I'm going to call the names out, and if you would just raise a hand, stand up, wave, whatever you'd like to do, just acknowledge. I'll start with Jessica. Oh, you're there.
Jessica Aloft.
Jessica Aloft and Linda Montenegro Detmer
Hi, Mom.
and Dolores Gomez and Susan Sullivan Maynard and Christina Zane. And I'm Colleen Mackin, the chair. And then we have 3 staff members assigned to us that are, are you on camera as well? Good. Okay. Karen Kinzer, senior civil engineer, and Commander Robert Meisner, Bob, as we refer to him, and also Jeanette Maldonado, administrative management analyst from the Brisbane Police, who's been always gracious enough to keep our minutes and do a lot of secretarial duties for us. So we are officially called to order. Everyone's here, full house. And we have an agenda, and normally we have a motion to adopt the agenda as is, but we've had a request to move the new business to the top of the list. So I'd like to make that, if someone would make a motion and a second on that.
I'll make a motion.
And a second, please.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, motion's carried. We're going to reverse new and old business. And I'm going to turn it over at this point to Karen Kinzer, because tonight we'll be reviewing the draft report of the Safe Pedestrian Routes to Schools, which has been a year-long effort on the part of this committee and a lot of staff and many manpower hours. So, Karen?
Well, you just changed the agenda to do the new business.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, but let's do the new business first, because it involves something that we have to deal with in the month of December.
So we're tasked with reviewing the general plan circulation element amendment. We're going to get a brief update from the planning director, because they are in the midst of preparing that draft update, and then it will come to the Complete Streets Committee to review and comment, and then our comments will forward to the Planning Commission before it goes ultimately to Council. So the planning director said he was available to kind of give a little intro and to prepare you guys for what will come, hopefully, before your next meeting, so that you have a chance to review it for the next meeting.
And do we know when perhaps we might receive that material to be reviewed?
Get that information, yeah. There it is.
That's coming to us
Might
now.
be off camera.
We're going to put you on the hot seat.
Great. I'm John Swickey, the planning director. Okay. I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
I just let them know that you would give them an update about what they're expecting and are going to review, just kind of an intro, so that they can be prepared and hopefully be able to have comments by our next meeting on December 4th.
Okay. What we intend to provide to you is actually a draft of the proposed language for an updated circulation element policies related to complete streets. The goal would be to get it to you. The week before is the Thanksgiving week, isn't it?
So around the week of the 16th.
Yeah, we'd have to get it to you a couple weeks in advance of that, not Thanksgiving week. We'll have to see when that date would be. And hopefully that gives you enough time. If not, we'd have to work with Karen to reschedule something else in terms of an alternative time or date. But that's the goal, to get that to you a couple weeks in advance of your meeting.
All right. Well, Thanksgiving is on the 27th, so the 23rd would be that week of Thanksgiving. The week before would be the 16th. So next week is the only week where we get 2 weeks before the end of November. If I've just confused you, I'll try to say it a different way.
I hear what you're saying. I'll look at my calendar and
Okay.
I'll talk to, I'm not the staff person who's actually going to be producing the work product, so it's a little easy for me to say what is or isn't doable, but we all understand you would need a little bit of lead time before you review the document, so we'll do our best to get it to you.
And do we have any ballpark idea how large this is? Is it, are we talking about 100 pages, 200, 500 volumes? What are we dealing with? Because that, at least a vague idea, how much time we might need.
8 pages, 10 pages,
Okay,
not,
okay.
we're not talking about a major, nothing of great substance in terms of volume of material.
Okay. And I thought about this a little because Karen had given me a heads up, and I thought that one way to approach it, and we talked a little bit about it, is that once we receive the document, we could possibly even opt to work on it in committees, subcommittees, and then if it looks doable for our December meeting to bring it up then otherwise we run the possibility of saying, let's reschedule the December meeting. I don't know if it's doable on that, a week later. But we start bumping into holidays.
Sure.
But I understand that the request was to try to complete it before the end of December. So we'll certainly make that effort.
Well, I know this is a little unusual as a work product for you, and we'll try to work within the time constraints. We have some constraints as well, but we'll all try to work the best we can to get you what you need.
Okay, thank you. And are there any guidelines you want to impart to us as long as you have our rapt attention here?
No, I think certainly when we draft the material, there'll be a cover report as well that kind of characterizes what we're proposing and why. The kind of general guidelines we're giving to the Planning Commission, we're going to have a similar sort of brief overview with them next week and at their meeting. And I think there are a couple things. One is context in terms of, you all have a very good idea of the physical limitations and in this town and what needs to be imposed where, putting, for example, bike routes, commuter bike routes is an element of complete streets. Safe routes to school would be an element of complete streets. Obviously, there are certain areas in town where one of those components makes sense and another component doesn't make sense. So the idea of using your judgment as opposed to there's going to be kind of a laundry list of things that are often considered, and your judgment as to where it makes sense given the constraints and the needs of the city. So it's not a one-size-fits-all, and that's, really use your good judgment of what you know about the community and where the needs are, and make sure the document reflects the needs of the community, not a generic laundry list that doesn't really fit your local needs.
So if I might ask a question, as long as we have you here, since the Baylands and the EIR is still in a state of flux and development at Sierra Point has somewhat been delayed by just maybe economic conditions, will this document encompass those areas? And how, in fact, I'm just wondering how we're going to be able to resolve that, because there's so much there that hasn't really been solidified yet.
Well, certainly with the Baylands, when a specific plan is adopted for that particular property, it will be subject to the Complete Streets Act requirements. That specific plan will. So the short answer is that plan will independently have to demonstrate how it complies. So the goal of this general circulation element is not to design complete streets for the Bayland. So I say that's not at issue for what we're going to be providing you for this next meeting. In terms of Sierra Point, that's one of those judgment calls, right? Because there's a physical transportation network out there already. So to the extent that you identify limitations or deficiencies in that system, I think that's fair game as part of this particular planning effort. But again, it would be within the confines, like anywhere else in town, you would be sort of considering the current development patterns and constraints as they exist today.
Okay. Does anyone else on the committee have a question?
I do. The memorandum that we received dated November 5th says this is pursuant to Assembly Bill 1358, and then it gives a description of the types of things. Is this what we're going to be looking at? Is these things that are listed under this Assembly Bill?
What we're looking at is the Assembly Bill sets some very broad parameters of what you're trying to achieve or what we're legally obligated to achieve. What the document you'll be looking at is presented to you is the staff recommendation of how we actually meet the objectives of the Assembly Bill, in terms of demonstrate how we are accommodating the multiple users and the multiple forms and modes of transportation. So it's not so much to look at the bill, it's our interpretation of how we're actually achieving the requirements of the bill.
And is this part of what will become our report as the Complete Street Safety Committee?
No,
I'm just trying to catch up.
Yeah, the end product is currently, and there's a link to it, and when you have the opportunity to look at the current, the city's current general plan has a circulation element currently, which has a map showing the major streets and what they're, how much traffic they're going to carry, or their major streets or minor streets. And there are also a number of policies and programs that speak to the functioning of the roadways and safety, traffic safety, et cetera, et cetera. So what we're charged to do under this state law, is to amend our circulation element to include the complete streets requirements, make sure that we're accommodating multiple modes and users. So that's really the requirement. And a lot of what we already have in our general plan achieves that. It's just not organized in a way that is really very cohesive from it, because that wasn't a context of how we were looking at things in 1994. So a big part of it is going to be reorganizing what we already have, identifying any gaps from the current policies in the general plan that we need to sort of bolster or upgrade to comply with the law, and modify some language. So we are using the 1994 circulation element as kind of the benchmark or the baseline.
Okay, so and we have a copy, Susan has it right now, of the 94 general plan, so we can look at the way that's written. And I assume it just then is updating with new language to include compliance with, and we have a copy of the Complete Streets Act. So it may not go into subsections of each part of town and specifics, but just the general guidelines that need to be adhered to?
Correct.
Okay.
And it may be a matter of reorganizing language that's already in that document, not so much that we're even, we might add some new language, but it might be a matter of reorganizing it. There will be a specific goal, for example, related to complete streets that doesn't exist. And we may pull policies and programs that are sort of scattered around into a cohesive section. So, somebody wants to look at our complete streets program and our general plan, it's all in a very concise place. You don't have to point out, well, some of it's over here in this section and some of it's it's really not possible to do that right now. I could argue that we, maybe we already meet the state law. If you kind of hunt and peck through the general plan as it's currently written, but I think there's a way of reorganizing it that's more useful for everybody, and that's part of the goal.
All right, okay.
Thank you.
Does that
Yes.
satisfy
thank you.
anyone else? No? Okay. Any other comments? Karen?
Oh, no, I think that was helpful, that we're not taking the old circulation element and setting it aside and starting with a blank slate, but restructuring and possibly refining what's there. So that makes the task seem a lot more manageable, really.
And if we just go back over the Complete Streets Act, there's with that familiarity, it tells you all the changes where it seemed like it was sometimes very automobile centric, and now with Complete Streets there's just a whole lot more devoted to incorporating people with disabilities and bikes and other types of transportation, and more big transit centers and how to make it all work together. So that's kind of the big departure that I saw. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, and please go home, have dinner. Thank you for coming and taking your time with us. If you want to come back and bring snacks, we're still here. Okay, so I guess something to consider as a committee is, in order to meet that timeline, we're going to have to stay in touch through Karen and Jeanette probably, and see if necessary to break it down, if you can forward it to us whatever we get, and then see if we can work in twos and we don't violate the Brown Act, and then come back. We may at that December meeting, I think it's December, is it 5th next meeting? 3rd. And see if we think we can make that meeting. I don't know if we'll be ready to finalize it, but certainly if we've done some work on it, we can talk about it at that meeting. And it gives us an opportunity to say, well, maybe we need another special meeting. I don't know. Is anyone here planning on going out of town? Say no.
Not on the 3rd.
Later in the month?
I know how it is. Holidays.
Holidays?
3 weeks of
No.
insanity.
No?
Well, I think, it's challenging. For me, the next Wednesday, I've got a different meeting, so I can't do that next, the 10th. That doesn't work for me. We had talked about the 17th, and that's getting late in December.
That's
Yeah,
really close to people take big banks of time off.
sure, yeah.
Well, I'm not planning to. We should take a poll.
Well, the other option is, and it's not always so good either, is after the big holiday week, the very last week of December. If we were available to say, okay, it's the last week of December, but maybe we can get in a quick meeting. I don't know. Doable? Anybody?
Yeah. Sure. Okay.
December.
New Year's Eve.
That's New Year's Eve.
Okay,
No.
push it back. You have a calendar in front of
I
you?
have the calendar in front of me.
Okay,
And
let me
so
see.
Right.
New Year's Eve is a Wednesday, Christmas Eve is a Wednesday. That leaves December 17th.
Well, do we have to do it on Wednesday?
Right, well, I'm thinking maybe, a different day other than Wednesday.
Could be another night of the week, yeah.
Yeah, like a Monday or a Tuesday, which would be the 29th or the 30th tentatively. Is that maybe doable? Okay, so we'll keep that in mind. And then maybe they would have it by the end of December.
What are your availability, that second week of December if we moved? We needed longer, and we moved our meeting from December 3rd, and we did it either the 8th or the 9th.
Well, and then it raises the question of if we're working in small groups, we may still need the first meeting just to see where we're at and say, okay, at the next
And then
next
again,
week,
maybe
a final,
That would work.
yeah, to
And that's
finalize.
still early enough
Right.
to get things happening.
Okay, and then in the worst case scenario, we're meeting on January 7th.
Right.
And that sounds like the planning department doesn't want it that late, but if they're giving it to us that late, that may be our drop dead
Right.
date to finish. Okay.
So we're ruling out the whole middle of December. It's just, I think we're going to run into quorum problems, and it's just, it's not worth banging our heads on the wall with it. Okay?
Okay.
Okay. Anything else we want to talk about on that? Questions? No? Okay. Back to our old business and the public review. We don't have public here. I don't know if anyone's at home wanting the full presentation. So Karen, you suggested that we could talk about it a little bit. It's certainly for anyone at home, if you're really out there watching, it is available on the city website.
Right.
And have you had any other correspondence or interaction with anyone else or Randy about requesting modifications on it?
No?
The only thing I recall from the one meeting we had where Ray Miller was there, and we talked a little bit about school crossing guards, and Lisa Macias, Chief Macias, had brought up that, I think she was the one, that currently is not in vogue because of liabilities. That's why they've kind of eliminated that. And maybe she wasn't the one to set it, but someone brought that up.
Is that
So-
right at school crossings, or, because I know you had suggested further down on say, visitation, and I know she kind of balked at that.
Well, for instance, at BES, there's the main crosswalk, and we have Bill the crossing guard, but then there's another crosswalk, and there's other intersections. So we said that could be something maybe left up to the parents and the students and the teachers, the school administration to say, well, if we had other kids, they might want to station them for high visibility, which we thought might slow cars down. Anyone else want to elaborate on that?
Did anybody ask the school?
No, but the point is, do we want to, we could just leave it in, and they might say, oh, no, we can't do that anymore because of liability, but maybe they would want to consider it.
Well, there's always volunteer parents, too. There's a
Exactly, or teachers. Some schools in the peninsula, the teachers go outside along with parents volunteering.
Yeah.
And we could outfit them with a vest and a sash. I'm sure they'd be, I see the raised eyebrow, Bob.
Yeah, I'd say then, given that we're not absolutely sure that that's out of the question, that we leave it in and
Okay.
keep it as an option.
In reading the master plan, the 1992 master plan, it did mention encouraging the schools to have crossing guards,
The general plan,
the general plan.
circulation element? Okay. Yeah, see. Well, then, maybe we want to try to find that out.
Okay. So my question, I guess, at this point is, if this is the draft, are we pretty much saying this goes forward to the council
I
as
think so.
final?
Yeah.
And do we have an idea when this might be on their agenda? Would it be for January? They have a meeting tomorrow night.
It's not going to be on that agenda.
No, I didn't think so.
There's a chance that it would be before January. I think we're ready to do it sooner.
I wonder if they have a second meeting in the month of December. Maybe that was
They're
canceled.
talking about canceling it. And then the
Right.
first one is reorganization, and they said they wanted to keep that light. So I can ask.
So it could be January before it goes before them.
It might be.
All right.
I have a question. How soon after it's gone over, approved, stamped, does it go into action?
Well, we have to put the funding part in. I guess that's the only part that's missing. And if we're going to get grants, then we'd have to go through that process. But if the council wanted to fund it, then it would go into action.
Okay.
That's also something to consider, is that what we put together is merely a recommendation to council. And at that point, there'll be dialogue between council and staff, council's direction on what parts, they may do all of it, or they may pick parts that they want to promote first or later. So that'll be a whole nother startup of a whole new process. That'll continue concurrently while we move on to other things, but that's probably how that's going to roll out. So it won't be immediate. It'll be at council's discretion on how we roll this out.
I see some huge safety issues that we've addressed that probably should take priority. And it kind of sounds like this may not even be implemented until the following school year, possibly. So
Well,
just
some of the stuff
trying to gauge it.
by nature is how we do our job. So, the awareness that we've gained through this process is going to allow us to focus some efforts on the sidewalks being clear, and that kind of thing is not going to require any dialogue with council, but there's certainly some other things that we talked about, changing striping and walkways and such, that requires funding, or might have other impacts on the community that the council might want to take longer to consider. So I think some of the things you're referring to, without going into detail, we'll be able to roll out right away. Some of the bigger, more complex issues might take some time.
Okay. Thanks, Bob.
Okay. So are we done on that topic? Anyone else? Additions, comments? No?
What about, weren't they going to inform the school, and what about telling people in Brisbane, or is that why this is tonight? Because it doesn't seem like people, are really aware of it.
Actually, that's written into our draft that they need to publicize it. That's thanks to Karen,
the school, yeah.
threw some passages in there about we wanted it publicized, we wanted it rolled out to the community to get them on board. How they actually implement that, I don't know.
And we talked about the water bills and the city news.
Right,
and stuff
the
like that.
Star presentation at the back to school night, appearances by the police department before the parents and teachers.
Good.
So that the community as well, it wouldn't come as a surprise, because our concern was that if there's enforcement, there could be resistance because they don't understand it, or they don't understand the reasons behind it.
I think logical people will understand.
I think so.
If there's more enforcement. I mean, I don't see why anyone should complain about that. It's for safety.
Well, I guess if there's anyone at home that is saying, well, I don't know what they're talking about, and I wish they did the presentation, I think maybe the last commentary we could at least verbalize is that, and maybe individually, is that one of the reasons this took so long is because we thought it was a simple project, and when we got into it, we were really concerned about safety, and we saw a lot of issues that we hadn't anticipated. And because of that, we did a more thorough investigation, and expecting some resistance, but that if people will take the time to look at the reasons behind it, we don't want to see accidents happen. We'd like to think that some of the suggestions will actually alleviate congestion as well. And one of the things we discovered is that the kids in town really walking to school are being really safe. And the difficulties are created by traffic and parents in a hurry. And we understand all the dynamics, but that maybe it's time to take another look at the way things are being done and routed, and that there could be better ways of doing it. And the hardest part on the route is the impact is going to be the actual safe route that we're proposing designating, and it will impact some residences where they want to park on the sidewalk and impede the sidewalk, and it forces kids, the parents, anyone with disabilities to go out into the street, and it's just not okay. We know there's a parking problem, we know the street's problem, we know it's not perfect, but we've tried to select the best route that we can to not make it hard for some residences, but that when someone comes home and it's really easy, I'm just going to park across the sidewalk in my driveway, or I'm used to parking up here, 2 cars on the sidewalk, and they can just go out in the street. That's the problem, because we have blind curves and we have narrow streets, and it's getting busier. And if you're going to designate a safe route, it's meaningless unless it's really safe and unless the route has something behind it. Anyone else want to add?
It's been a tough job
It has.
with a lot of discussion about saving parking and creating safety, and we've gone back and forth quite a bit, and so it hasn't been taken lightly, and I wanted to echo that. But I think we've got a good start and included some areas we didn't intend to initially, so we've broadened it. Hopefully it will be well received, but there's always resistance to change.
Well, and for anyone that is unhappy with it, then I would just encourage them show up at the council meeting where it's rolled out and make your voice heard. I mean, this was one meeting they could come here to us, but we're not saying we broke the mold and it's a perfect plan. Someone else may come through with some great ideas. We'd like to hear it. I'm sure the council would like to hear it. They may have ideas to add to it. As Bob said, they may modify it, they may pick and choose things, but it's not locked in stone. And the reason it's being proposed is the status quo in Brisbane needs updating. And this is an opportunity to do that. It hasn't been done in a while, where we looked at crosswalks and sidewalks and the drop-off programs at the two schools and said, maybe this isn't really a good idea the way they're doing it. So greater minds can prevail. Come forward and say something. So anyone else? Karen, you want to add to that? Bob?
I just wanted to add that we'll definitely keep you posted as to when it goes to council, and
That'd be good.
we might get some public input there, some more,
Right.
some at all. And then as the implementation is after the council decides what they want us to do with the plan, you know, we can definitely check in about implementation, about whether you guys have other comments on how the outreach happens than the ways that we've already planned and talked about, and we'll just kind of keep a check-in process as it gets rolled out and implemented.
Okay, so we're ready to move on. Okay, now we're going to go on to something that I'm actually looking forward to, and maybe everyone else is. December, our work's cut out for us. We go into the beginning of the year, and more than one person on this committee has said, well, what's next? And that's one of the reasons we got the copy of the Complete Streets Act and have been looking at what our responsibilities are charged with. Obviously, if council or planning gives us something to do, we're supposed to react to that because we're an advisory committee, we don't make policy. But in addition to that, when this whole committee was formed, Ray Miller was the mayor at the time, and he made it very clear because I asked the question outright, are we only supposed to work on what is handed to us? And he said, no, we want this to be also proactive. If there's other things you want to look at and bring to our attention, do that. But we've tried to stay the course with one assignment, which was given to us as a priority. But at this point in time, come January 1st, we have an opportunity. We can say, well, what other things might we see or like to perhaps investigate further? So I know what's near and dear to my heart, and I've had conversations with some of you individually. This might be a good time, not in detail, but just make a little pitch, and then in January, I think perhaps we can make that the agenda, that we go over some of these ideas. And if we want to, between now and January, refine them a little bit so that we're more familiar with what you have in mind, we can channel that through Jeanette, distribution to Bob and Karen as well. And then it will give us more time come January where we can perhaps prioritize or discuss whether we think something should actually be taken on as a project. So anybody want to go first?
Sure. There's a couple of things that are near and dear to my heart. One of them is also continuing the Safe Street route planning so that we reach more areas in Brisbane. But besides that, there's that insane bike lane that crosses a freeway exit, basically. And I think that's terrifying and really needs to be looked at. And thirdly is the communications boxes that are unprotected and could be hit by a vehicle. I mean, we need some giant rocks or trees planted in front of them or something to protect the communications in Brisbane. And I know there's more, but I can't think of any more right now.
I concur on that bike lane. I've come off of that off ramp, and I've had cars go immediately around me and into that bike lane. If there was a biker there, it would have been gone. And it just gripes me because it's illegal and it's wrong, and people are doing it.
So we need to create safety somehow. And I have some ideas, but I won't go into them now. I agree with that. And the shrubbery on that freeway exit, the overpass, is outrageously overgrown. So it limits your visibility to even see if there's a bike approaching, if you know that it's coming, which to many it's a big surprise. So,
Well, and the bikes can't see the cars.
right.
So they're both entering that intersection together blindly.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
That off-ramp is Caltrans' responsibility, so it could be simply a matter of a citizen going onto their website and logging a service request to cut the shrubbery back.
Oh,
As a-
that's
at least
good.
as a start.
That's a start. Okay.
But I think if we're looking at bicycling, that we need to look a little bit more broadly.
Absolutely.
You know, in my experience, the San Francisco bike routes send everybody south on Tunnel Road, not Bayshore, and the southern bike maps send everybody up Bayshore. So when it gets to Brisbane, you know, if you're heading south, you're on one street. If you're heading north, you're on a parallel street. So, and Anja Miller has researched and found that the city has an obligation to maintain, not the city has an obligation, but the city has imposed on the businesses that occupy and own Tunnel Road, depending on which section of Tunnel Road in Brisbane it is, to maintain bike lanes, and that hasn't been done. So that's an old bit of history that's just gotten documented.
That's great.
So we can dig further into cycling.
If at Caltrain had an article, it was an article in the paper about Caltrain with, I think the average ridership 10 years ago was 24,000 a day, and it's now about 64,000. I talked to one of the conductors, and I said, you know, during special events like the Giants, can you just add extra trains? He says, we don't have any extra cars.
Wow.
We're already maxed out. They're having riders with bicycles where they're telling them they can't get on the train because they don't have room. And the one thing that I've noticed is on Tunnel, more and more bicycles going to the Caltrain station, but I wouldn't want to be on Tunnel because I have seen the areas where there's no shoulder and they almost are forced off the road. The speed is too high. The road is just in bad shape, and if in fact, as Anja Miller insists, and she has sent some documentation which I can share, and I think Susan has some, it was originally charged to Southern Pacific when the road was made a public right-of-way. They wanted the city to take over maintaining the road, and the city said, no, we'll make it a public thoroughfare, but you take over the maintenance. And in addition, we want a bike lane. Now, the proof of this, I guess Randy, for your information, also Karen, Randy has verified there was
I
a
found that
bike
map.
lane.
I found that map, so yeah.
You did?
There, yeah.
Oh, good show. Okay. Kudos. That's great. So what Anya has been communicating is that the bike lane now should still be there for whomever the property owners are, which would be at this point UPC, that they are supposed to have that bike lane and it should be restored if it's anywhere underneath all the debris, gravel, and
Shrubbery.
sinking into the ground. And Sierra Point Lumber, that would involve them, anyone along there, property owners. But that really, we could go, we don't know, 10 years with the Baylands, but the bike lane, there's nothing. That really needs to happen.
The staff has scratched their heads a bit on this, as I know Anya Miller's brought it up, is space-wise, how does that work? And I guess I always thought she was talking about in the existing roadway. What do? You just a 24-foot wide roadway, you just stripe a bike lane, there's no room. But this thing is, this constructed bike lane was 10 foot off the road, but it's 6 feet wide. So is that wide enough for travel in both directions? If you put that back, people are going to walk there too. And that's not.
She said something about the roadway was to be 84 feet wide, And I said, there's not even a shoulder if I'm looking for a bike lane. She said there wasn't a provision for a shoulder. The bike lane was supposed to be, there might be just dirt between the road, and the bike lane was supposed to be on the east side of the roadway.
That's correct.
Completely separate. Is that
Right,
what
but it's
you-
still 6 feet wide. Does that work for bikes in two directions, and then pedestrians will probably walk over there if you ever get pedestrians? It's not, it needs
As
to be
long
at
as
least
they
10
have
feet
someplace to
wide.
jump out of the way.
I wouldn't.
That's true. Some way to jump out of the way.
I don't think I would ride there. I'd ride on the road, and I
Yeah.
do commute sometimes on my bike.
Right.
If there was traffic in two directions, 6 feet wide, that's not.
But would you feel comfortable without a shoulder? So if you've got two cars oncoming, you have nowhere to even move? Because I've seen that happen too, where the cars were like, oh, that other car's going to move. Oh, that other, I'm not going to move. And then the bike's going.
The bike has the right to the lane.
They do now with
So-
New California law. You slow down and 3 feet. They really
Is that a
do.
new law? That's not a new law.
Yeah, there's a new law just went into effect.
Yeah, 3 feet.
Oh, right.
Sounds like the cycling is the issue that needs
Oh,
to be
it's
on
Right.
the list.
Right.
But we're not going to solve this tonight, but
No,
it should definitely
so
be on
to
our
just
list.
give you a little
And that would include the
background.
tunnel road.
Good point. Good point. So, Susan, did you have anything more on that? That's one thing. Did you have something else you wanted to bring up?
No, that was my, oh, actually I did. My latest experience in going to a recreation class at Mission Blue. My latest experience in going to a Mission Blue class, sponsored by the Recreation Department, is that each of the individuals drove separately in a car. All right? So the instructor had a car, the staff person from the Recreation Department had a car, and then each of the attendees had a car to get from one side of the Brisbane to another side of the Brisbane. So looking at how we reduce single vehicle occupancy around town might be a complex issue to tackle, but it might also feed into the whole circulation plan of what can we do to encourage alternatives to single vehicles staying within Brisbane parameters.
Well, and maybe adding to that is Brisbane has several distinct sections,
Yes.
which are disjointed. I hate to compare it to Pacifica with Lindemar and Manor Drive, but we do have different sectors, so that if we talk even about revitalizing downtown Brisbane, how does someone at Sierra Point without a car go eat lunch in Brisbane, central Brisbane, old Brisbane? They have to get a ride. They're not going to walk, I doubt it, unless they have a 2-3 hour lunch hour. But Dolores had talked about also there used to be a little commuter shuttle.
Oh, yeah. Went up to Bayshore, though, so people could take the bus up there.
Right. And that may be something you could say, oh, that'll never happen, but maybe it's time again that there would be a shuttle that just circulates, just to transport people. If someone in Valley Drive or at Sierra Point could grab a shuttle to go have lunch and get back to work and not have to get in a car or worry about it, they might do that.
It'd alleviate parking here, too.
Right,
at
it
lunchtime.
would, the parking,
Yeah.
right, as well. So I'm going to mark that down as just a shuttle. Anybody else?
Getting back to Bayshore,
Yes.
I would like to see us address the speeding on Bayshore and in Brisbane and enforcement.
I echo the Bay Shore. I did ask Karen some questions, and Bob, I don't know if you've heard from Jeanette. You were out that day, so I talked to Jeanette a little bit. With the increased traffic on 101, which from 4:30 on, it's just turned almost into a parking lot. People are very smart. They're very shrewd in their alternative routes, and they're using Bayshore. And if you go 4:30 to 6:30, northbound, southbound, if you're going southbound from the city, they'll go down to sister cities. And I hate to say it, I don't want a retroactive ticket, by the way, but I have sped up to see how fast they're going. They're going 60, 65. They're blowing me off the road, But my bigger concern is there are traffic lights, crosswalks. Sometimes I'll go use Samtrans and I'm crossing at Old County, and it scares me sometimes because Karen made a comment and said, well, there's 4 lights. How are they getting up to speed? They're trying to get through that Old County intersection before the light, so they speed up if they're going northbound. And if they're southbound and maybe it's staggered work hours coming out of Valley Drive or across Sierra Point and they want to use Bayshore, they're coming in droves and they're going with the flow of traffic. And I could too, but I'd be going 65. And it's way too fast. And my comment with that, my concern, and I mentioned to Karen, is you'd never put a bike lane next to a freeway. And yet we have what's turning into a freeway on Bayshore with a bike lane that we're encouraging people to use. When we're talking about complete streets and encouraging people to walk and use bicycles and other things, but are they really safe? And I understand there's more involvement, and Bob, you know, and Karen, about what sets the speed limits, but I think for everybody concerned, disability, seniors, pedestrians, people getting off the bus, we really do need to look at Bayshore. It's gotten very bad.
Well, what I'd like to say about that is I'm not really sure that, I mean, those are general traffic concerns that change from time to time. I mean, I've certainly written my plenty of citations on Bayshore Boulevard over the years. There are people that speed, but we've also established quite a bit of data more recently, as a matter of fact, to establish the speed limits through surveys. So the amount of speeding that was detected isn't abnormal per se.
Mm-hmm.
That's not to say that there aren't certain times during the year or different things that contribute to that, but how we would normally handle that is through a citizen would contact the police department and express their concerns about specific place and time, and we'd try to dedicate some resources to that to either verify that the problem exists, and if it does, come up with a solution to deal with it. Just not so sure those are the types of issues that are best dealt with in the form of the Safe Streets Committee, because these are day-to-day operational things.
I understand exactly what you're saying, but I'm not sure I completely agree. For the reason that in a discussion I had with Karen, do you call them counters? What is it when you put out to see, is that what they're called?
Sure, traffic counters, yeah.
Traffic counters to see speed. And then, of course, Bob, your department would have periodic enforcement. I don't know with limited personnel how often you're able to do that. It may be frequent, it may not. But a comment even that Karen made, and you can verify this if I'm wrong, that the time of day when you put out those counters may not be the busiest commute hour. So during the middle of the day, I'm not seeing people going really fast. It's during the commute hour.
Well, that's exactly my point, though. So if a citizen, any citizen, identifies a potential hazard or problem, their perception, they're more than welcome to call us. We have a way to deal with that. We have a board where people complain. We put it up there so all the officers are aware of these perceived problem areas, and we dedicate resources to that. The officers on their normal patrol are supposed to hit those areas, and there's always more than one, and in turn they get addressed.
But if I did that, Bob, I'd be calling you every week.
Yes.
Well, we do.
So I think as a committee, it's important that one of our functions is advisory. So when I say it's increased, it's in the last 10 years, it's increased. So if I was to get angry every time this happens, and I'm almost getting run over, literally. I can't go 55, and people are on my tail, and they're honking, and it's just the status quo. So I think I'm not saying what route we go or what we do with this, but if we're to be an advisory committee where, as Ray expressed, we're to be the eyes and ears for them, I think it's incumbent on us to not ignore situations that we see, to at least illuminate them and say, maybe this deserves a further investigation. And we may find there's nothing that can be done but enforcement, but that we've looked at it,
Well, I think that's part of my point, though. You've raised the issue,
right?
and if you've spoken with Karen about it, and you've told me tonight, and I think you've spoke with Jeanette earlier, so you've directed it to the proper department. Now it's up to us to take a look at it and deal with it, because that's what we do. That's the service we provide to the citizens.
Okay, well, I think that that's all well and good, but we would like the feedback of what happens to see if there's more perhaps that we would like to look at. Because I mentioned to Karen, I said, well, if we were putting those counters out during the middle of the day, could we do that during commute hour just to see? Just to see and get some data back, some information. So we're not sitting here saying, wow, we think this needs some further investigation. And then we hand it over and we never know what happens. It goes somewhere else.
Well, we normally provide feedback to those people who contact us as well. That's not outside our normal way we operate, I guess
Right.
is what I'm saying. So in this case, you've let us know, and I'm not privy to your conversation with Karen, but, she has her department way of dealing with that, and we do as well, and as I've explained. So we'll put our thing in motion, and at some point, we'll be able to provide you with some feedback.
Yeah, I think maybe we'd like a little discussion of how you would both go about addressing this. So we know your department does one thing, her department does another. How would you approach this? And what, in fact, would you be bringing back to us? Does anyone else want to add to
On our
that?
list, because we don't know if we
Right.
might want some infrastructure changes. They have
Right.
the yellow flashing lights that can go up. There's other
Exactly.
traffic calming stuff that
Right.
that doesn't happen out there that could happen. And so if we have it on our list as a problem area, we might come up with different solutions than enforcement.
Right.
I agree completely that it needs to be on our list. It's not going to get solved tonight.
Right.
And so we should continue with this, and, reporting repeatedly is not the answer.
It's helpful. It's a piece of it. We might come up with some
Yeah.
other ideas too.
Right.
I'd just like to say that I find, you might go during commute hours, but when I go on errands, I go in the morning, and I might come back anywhere between 11 and 1. And I always run into people that I get to the other side because they're just zooming by me. So I think it's sort of random, I guess. It could be any time, not just commute hours. So just
I've experienced that too.
Yeah.
Different hours.
Speeds.
Yeah.
It's kind of scary.
So this, we're just making a list of potential things, and that's one I think we've all seen something going on there that deserves a further look. We'd like to add that to the list.
Sure, and it's up to you guys what you want to discuss, but, if you're expressing a safety concern now, we're going to do our thing.
Oh, by all means. Obviously, I'm not going to say don't. Don't wait for us. Go ahead. But we can, as Jessica said, more detail and more studies, observation from both of you would be really helpful to us. We'd appreciate that. So
I also mentioned on in-town speeding visitation.
Right.
I go out sometime between 6:30 and 7 in the morning, and people are flying down visitation in a hurry to get to work. I can't believe it.
San Bruno too. They go down San
Yeah.
Bruno real fast too.
And some of this, in fairness, we're not just saying, well, it's the police department and they need to be there, because you can't be everywhere all the time. And none of us know, you have officers on duty. If someone said, well, there's serious felons doing this or that or break-ins, we wouldn't want you dealing with one car coming down visitation speeding. But absent some idea what's going on and looking at it, where we found this on the safe route, things that are sometimes just a physical modification that can make a difference, that we're volunteering our time, we're willing to look at it. So use our diligence, enthusiasm, and interest in doing this if you will work with us on that.
Certainly, I guess, I heard of this kind of through a roundabout way today. I guess my concern was if this had been on your mind, anybody's mind, that's why I used the word citizen before, is that we really want anybody with those concerns to call us right at that time. And that would be through the on-duty watch commander to say, I have a concern about this road, not to, through other channels or to wait for meetings like this. So that's kind of one of the messages I want to deliver. If any one of you as a citizen have a concern, a safety concern about speeding, stop signs and whatnot, we want you to call the on-duty watch commander the day that it comes to mind, because that'll give us the opportunity to begin to take a look at the problem or maybe even solve it. Now, how we do a diagnosis and analysis here, I think is a completely separate component, and I hear you loud and clear,
Right,
the desire
exactly.
to do that, but perhaps I was looking at it from a different perspective, is that we're talking about something that's happening now, it's a concern that's happening now. How do we effectively deal with that today? And that's through a different road than I think that you're maybe perhaps envisioning, which is
Right.
which is more investigative and coming up with other solutions. So maybe we could agree to that in the short term, call the on-duty watch commander, and then we can always follow up as a committee to look at other ways to resolving it.
Well, the bonus for everyone at home watching this, you have Bob's number. Call the department, call the watch commander, and tell him your experience on Bayshore. But in the meantime, it's a double prong. We do need citizen involvement in Brisbane. If they think it's a problem, as several of us do, I'm sure there's more out there. So thank you for reminding us that that's something that we can do.
Yeah. And we do have a list of those places. Bayshore's one of them periodically. And so the officers do address those. And like I've used the expression before, it's kind of like whack-a-mole, where we'll address resources in one area, it'll calm, and then another one will pop up, and we're always chasing those. But that's part of the...
It's never going to end, Bob. To your retirement day, it's always going to be there. We're relying on you to whack the mole constantly.
We could add that to our-
Wherever he goes, you're going to find him.
We could add that to our education idea, though, that maybe people don't know that they should call, like, right then when they see somebody run a stop sign. And they,
Exactly.
I didn't even think about calling the police.
Right.
I just said, that guy just totally blew that stop on visitation.
Right.
And,
But,
and we do, if
give you
you're
the
able to get a
education.
license plate, we'll make an effort to call that person. We can't issue them a ticket at that point, but, we do like to have a chat with them and, remind them that whether you believe it or not, you're driving, is enough for somebody to write down your plate and call us. So, and that's very helpful. I think it has a big impact to that person, so.
I'll also mention that several trucking companies in Valley Drive, or not trucking companies, but they have fleets of large trucks where I've had them come on that flyover northbound, and they were going 65 or 70. I called the company, and they were all really interested and responsive that one of their drivers was going that fast down Bayshore. I never had anyone blow me off and go, oh, well. They literally called me back, and they spoke to the driver and thanked me for doing it. So anyone out there at home, call the trucking company when you see this happen as well. Okay. So moving along here. Christina, ideas, things to look at?
The one thing that I did notice, I participated in the fire hydrant repainting.
Yes.
And I noticed a lot of the curbs in front of the fire hydrants aren't red anymore. And it might be as simple as filling out the online, the ticket that we can have the service request do then. And I'm happy to take pictures and take it. But it was funny because I had wanted to show off one of the ones that I did, and somebody was parked right in front of it. So, which was no big deal. But then I thought, gosh, if there was a fire, there's all these cars in front. There's nowhere for the fire truck to park. So, but maybe look at the red zones in front of the hydrants, and then even the white stripe, restriping the white stripes, because I know it's kind of non-existent where on my street, but I don't have to worry about it, but it might just be something we look at it.
I'll only comment about the fire hydrants. We have the ability to cite for blocking a fire hydrant. It's an issue of how many feet. The curb's not a factor for us, and it concerns that. But red zones and striping is definitely not my area, and Karen will have to comment on that.
It's kind of a practice not to paint red curb at intersections anymore because it's kind of a chore to maintain them. And we get in the area that if they're not fresh enough that somebody says, I didn't see that it was red, and it's kind of a challenge to enforce. So with no red curb at all, the vehicle code still applies, as Bob said. So we're not really trying to paint the red curbs at intersections. There are a few cases where we have them where there's no other, you put a sign at either end and not paint a red curb, and that's probably a preference, staff-wise, to use signs and not paint.
Something just occurred to me. We had Scott Houston, a member of the public, came to one of our meetings where Ray Miller was there, and he brought up sight lines at intersections where large cars, trucks park near the corner. So as you're pulling out the side or streets onto the main streets, you can't see. And I encounter that. It's something that maybe Brisbane we can't fix. Do we want to look at that? And maybe that, you're touching sacred ground there because people go, I park near that corner and that's the only place I have to park. But my observation is people don't want to park right at the edge of the corner because they're afraid of getting sideswiped. They park further back.
So sightlines would be a good one.
Do we think that that's...
It's worth visiting.
Okay.
There were some that were pretty critical, like the Alvarado and San Bruno intersection where the kids walk to school. That was a good one.
And I don't know if with Public Works if there's a way to mark that, and we could go in more detail, but that's something that Scott had brought up that he felt we should perhaps look at.
Yeah, and I think those are probably best dealt with on a case-by-case basis,
Right.
especially if you're limiting parking with
Okay.
an action like that.
Christina, did you have more?
Oh, that was it.
Jessica?
No, I was mostly interested in the safe routes, and I think we've done a great job
Okay.
pursuing that one.
Dolores, any other ideas?
No, this isn't an idea. It's just a comment. The gentleman from the planning said one size does not fit all, and that certainly pertains to Brisbane because many years ago when it was laid out, it's so different than the modern city today. So I know before I came on board that the group really worked hard to try to adjust walking situations and where people could get a thorough route because of the way the streets are laid out. So you were really dealing with a lot, and I think everything went really well in your final plan.
Well, in thinking about complete streets and the general plan, if you think back to the last general plan, how much traffic there was in Brisbane with all the anomalies, sight lines, hills, number of cars and parking, it's a different place. And where with complete streets, we're encouraging people to ride bicycles, and we're trying to make it safe for everyone, because also in complete streets includes, if you read it, the safety of motorists. But how do we keep them respectful of each other, knowing that the amount of traffic's going to increase? And Susan, dealing with tell me the name of the committee with the city, the Hartley.
Yes, I've been attending the Geneva Hartley Community Advisory Committee, and they're looking at the increase in population at Candlestick Point and Hunters Point and the flow of traffic they anticipate coming across the north side of Brisbane and out to the Balboa Park BART station. So they're trying to get ahead of the flow of new housing, new jobs, new retail and businesses. So, as the Baylands EIR gets formalized and the planning goes ahead of that, we need to look at, from a committee's perspective, how does this additional property in Brisbane fit in our circulation plan, fit in with complete streets planning? So,
Well, one thing, because you and I talked a little bit about it, is that the Baylands may take a lot of time, but San Francisco's moving ahead on Schleglock. and they're moving ahead on Geneva and connections to BART and connecting Hunters Point to Balboa Station and light rail and all of that. So we can say, well, that's up there, it doesn't affect us, but it does, because it's right at our city limits. Some of the impact will come to Brisbane from that area, and I don't know the timeline on Schleglock, or if you know what it is.
The property's been laid out. I don't know when they're going to be breaking ground, but the plans are finalized. So, yeah, it's all these people that are going to be on our northern border, and you look at the sophisticated multimodal plans that San Francisco is making, and then you come down to Brisbane, and we have the train that stops once an hour, and the 292 that runs every half an hour, and the shuttle bus that only makes loops in the morning and the evening commute times. We have no other public transportation.
Yeah, and the train and the bus don't even connect.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing to consider with that is we can say, well, we seem to be grappling with it just fine here, and that's up there. But look at the Freeway 101 and 280 backing up, and whatever they add 10,000, the housing, as I recall, in that northern area north of Brisbane, between Daly City and San Francisco was about 15,000 residential units. Units, that could be 2 cars for half of those. And then whatever impacts that area in the north, they're going to find ways to take shortcuts here. And the impact to us is you can't get home because we only have limited access in and out of Brisbane. So that's going to affect how do we keep people here safe, and how do we accommodate some of those people may work in San Francisco, get off the train, get off of BART. They're going to come south. They may live in South City. They're going to come down Bayshore. So I think it's good that you've been doing that, and we need to be aware of what they do. Mm-hmm. Any other ideas? No? Okay. So I've got a list. I'll forward it to you, Jeanette, and if you want to distribute it, that could be put on agenda for perhaps January, or if any other additions anyone wants to make and elaborate. And beyond that, any other business to attend to? Did you, sir? Did you? Oh, thank you very much. We appreciate your taking a seat.
Colleen?
Yes.
That's my husband, Bill Detmer.
I know. I'm making him John Q. Public.
Oh, John Q. Public.
Yes. It makes you more official because you're an interested citizen rather than just... Right, exactly.
Any comments on the safe pedestrian route to school plan?
You mean the one up on top on Solano?
Yeah, we're proposing changes around Littman and around BES and other places in town.
It's on the city website.
Like this, thumbs up.
What my wife does. Yeah, support.
Thanks, sweetheart.
Okay, so our next meeting date and time is slated for December the 3rd, which we may hold to that, the possibility of meeting the week thereafter, not necessarily on a Wednesday. And the heads up that we'll be receiving some documents, perhaps forming some subcommittees of 2, not in violation of the Brown Act, to start looking at it so that we can come to the December 3rd meeting and be ready to have some discussions. So at this point in time, if there's no further business, I would entertain a motion for adjournment.
Motion.
And a second. All in favor?
Aye.
I see no opposition. Meeting's adjourned.